So, welcome to another show. Today we've got Darryl Kanouse on the show, who's a technologist and an author. So, welcome to today's show, Darryl.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. So, first things first, actually, because you don't really get many people that are Mentons. So, fellow Menton.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I joined Mensa probably, I guess, what is it, almost 20 years ago. And I think it was like the social club aspect of it was what I thought was kind of interesting. And doing that kind of stuff. But then I got a family, and so I don't really participate in much of the activities, but still carry the card. I'm happy to be a member.
So, why did you decide to take it? Did you also class yourself as quite intelligent, or were you sort of pushed to take it in some respect? People would say, "Oh, try taking this IQ test, see what you get." What was the reason behind that?
Um, I think if I'm being perfectly honest, there's probably a vanity component to it a little bit. And, when I was a kid, they had in elementary schools had programs that were called gifted student programs of some sort that you could kind of test into, and then you could get out of class for, maybe an hour a day and go do games with other kids that had tested in the same way. And so I think that had kind of planted the seed in me that, perhaps uh, it'd be worth kind of getting that validation in paper of some sort. I look back, now, I'm just it's an organization to be a part of, and it looks okay on the resume. So that's my
Yeah, I
story.
think
Well,
that's true. I think with always with accomplishments, there is always some level of selfishness or vanity to it. That's just the way that human beings are wired, essentially. But as you said, it's still a good thing to be part of. It gives you, I think for me as well, it gives you um, a lack of excuses, I think, because because you are deemed to be intelligent, you can't then say, well, I wasn't intelligent enough, I wasn't X, Y, and Z. You have to then say and sort of live up to that expectation in some respects. So I can see
yeah.
that you are, in some respects, living up to that expectation of intelligence, and you have written a book. You want to talk a little bit about the book itself, but also about the underlying aspect of where you came to write the book, namely Taoism and Lao Tzu.
Yeah, for sure. So the book, it's called The Architect Way, and it is a adaptation of the Tao Te Ching. And by adaptation, I mean it is a reflection in substance and intent. So 81 chapters reflected in 81 chapters in the book, and it takes that perspective of the Tao Te Ching and adapts it into the language of technology development, and kind of the business aspects of technology development. Just to talk a little bit about sort of how I came to even doing this in the first place. So I've had a pretty long career in technology development and building software systems for some pretty big companies, and my role has been what you would call a solutions architect, generally meaning sort of at the beginning, take an idea, go from the nothing to something kind of stages. And then eventually you hand that off to engineering teams who flesh it out and then end up delivering those systems. One of the interesting parts about technology in general, but the solution architect phase in particular is that there's a lot of intuition that goes into it, and that the sort of genesis of an idea, you can read lots of books that can give you the backgrounds on how technology works. But when you want to translate a need, whether it's a business need or personal need or whatever it is that technology is intended to address, when you want to translate that into an actual system, um, there's an intuition that comes with that is difficult to put into words. And uh, but it shares a lot of characteristics with some of the things that you get out of Taoism. So you want your systems to be harmonious, and you have to recognize that they're interconnected and they need to be adaptable. And there's a lot of the themes that I picked up through my understanding of Taoism and reading through the literature that I embodied in my personal life, and that I ended up seeing reflected in uh, my professional life in producing good results. And so, when the question comes up of like, well, what's the secret to your success, if to be bold enough to say such a thing, but that secret in my mind is the philosophical understanding of those things that are really difficult to describe and put into words, and how you can sort of visualize a system to make it kind of come to life.
So for me, like Taoism, I don't know how much the sort of listeners know what it is, and I think with any philosophy, it's really how you explain it and how you sort of understand it. But for me, Taoism is about a sort of flow and not forcing things so much, as you said, about intuition. And Wu Wei, I think they use terminology
Mhm.
for, is basically not forcing and not rowing against the tide, but in fact setting the sail and allowing the waves to take you. And I mean, I do judo, for example. It's something that they talk about in judo a lot, is use the movement of another individual to throw them across the room, as opposed to trying to force your way. Is that what your understanding of it is it of it is, rather? And how does then that translate into the specifics of technology? So you mentioned um um intuition, for example.
Yeah.
Is that going with the flow of what you think the solution is, or is that a case of the actual technology itself behaving in a way that's as clean as it can be in some respects?
Yeah, so I think it's a lot of what you were kind of hinting at there at the end, where I think the idea of the Wu Wei, the kind of effortless action, that is a that is a hallmark of a technology system that is optimally designed. And to the extent that the Tao Te Ching is sort of the way of virtue, the architect way would be the approach that produces a system that is uh, that you could say is defined by this sort of effortless way. Now, in achieving that, there's many other notions that are sort of adjacent to the effortless way, which is, when things are in balance, when things are simplified, when you recognize the interconnectivity of things, being able to adapt. Those would all be what I would consider to be um, kind of adjacent behaviors that would lead to, or that would be, indicate that you're acting in the effortless action way. So when you're building a technology system, and if that's your intention, is to have the most efficient system, the one where data flows with the least resistance, where you have the lowest latency in request and response times, where systems can integrate without a lot of overhead and maintenance. Those are all signs of effortless action. Achieving that is through many of the other kind of notions that are described in the Tao Te Ching, which are again, the balance, recognizing the interconnectivity, harmony, those kind of aspects.
Yeah, because what I think what a lot of people don't understand is we've obviously used the terminology of basically not trying and not forcing things. That is very different, isn't it, than being lazy in some respects. It's basically trying to use every part of your strength in the most efficient way possible. So is it for you about the efficiency or efficacy of the program itself, or the structure of the solution, to make sure that, as you said, it falls in harmony within itself without giving out waste product, if you like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like one example of the kinds of decisions and technology trade-offs that you would be considering, and then looking at it through the lens of the sort of effortless action, might be the trade-off between usability of a system and its security. And there's there's a natural tension there, right? Because the more secure a system is, the more difficult it is to gain access to the data behind it, for example. And so that shows up for users of a system as, the system might be slow, and those kinds of things. And what I will say is that the path the least of least action is not one where you say, well, no security, wide open, everything just flows freely, right? That's not exactly the point. It's more, how can you achieve a balance where everybody's intentions feel satisfied and in flow of the system. So users have the right amount of access to their data, and they have it in the way that's agreeable to them from a security perspective. You, as the custodian of that data, are able to apply reasonable amounts of control, and you make those trade-offs, and you are considerate of that balance, and that consideration and those trade-offs then lead to a system that will sort of serve these kind of effortless action needs. I hope that kind of makes sense there.
Yeah. Is there an element there that though of some utilitarianism with respect? I think you said that to keep more parts of the system or people operating the system happy. So that's something that you, again, balance would come into the forefront there, wouldn't it? If, for example, with society today, you've obviously got the leaders, the bourgeoisie that are running everything, and they're the happy ones, and everyone else is probably less happy. The working class, as it were. Is it a case of that as well within the system? You're saying, well, there's got to be a balance. There's got to be some security, and security's got to be happy at 6 out of 10, but also there's got to be some user friendliness that's a 6 out of 10. So across the board, maybe a 6 out of 10 for each aspect is better than 10 out of 10 security, but a 0 out of 10 for usability, etc. Is that essentially what you're referring to with regards to the balance or the harmony within such a situation?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that balance becomes easier when you in the context of some of those other themes like simplicity, right? So one of the things that that got my attention very early on with the Tao Te Ching was actually the very first lines in the very first chapter around that, if you can talk about whatever Tao you're describing isn't actually the thing, right? It's bigger than that. And so when you kind of accept that, then simplicity sort of feels like it's the good counterpart to the kind of contemplations that you have to do in making these sort of balances. And so if you're talking about in a social system, say not necessarily a technical system, but a social system that has the custodians of social order, and then the individuals that are sort of living within that society, and there's an imbalance there. The needs of everybody can get complicated, and so sometimes there's kind of a reductionist view is helpful. Utilitarian is kind of tricky because I think that there's a in my view, it might lead to a kind of a never-ending cycle of implied considerations and consequence between individuals, and so rather than sort of take that kind of the implications of all of these sort of adjustments across folks, another interesting kind of takeaway from the Tao Te Ching is the one of interconnectedness, where there's a state where we're all connected, and seeing things as a kind of timeless state can be really both like simplifying and helpful when sort of trying to find where the virtues and benefits are of certain things.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to what you said about the utilitarianism, and I think that's the big disadvantage with thinking in that respect, because it's, well, then how do you put weight on who should be happiest? There's no equal parameters as to which should be the happiest, because at the end of the day, a child who's unhappy because they didn't get their sweets should not have the same weighting as a parent who's unhappy with how their child has been brought up. So again, it's a lot more complex than that, isn't it? But coming back to your second point about the Tao Te Ching, one of my favorite parts, and it's quite at the start as well, is it says something along the lines of, I don't know it word for word, but the basic premise is that nature doesn't force anything, but it still gets everything done.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
that's what you're trying to allude to, isn't it? That you would like something, a program or ourselves as individuals to get things done, but without having to really, backbreak really to get things done. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. The one of the biggest sources of tension that you would want to alleviate, and these sort of forces of nature, if you will, that in an ideal state to just kind of get things done. I think you can find that parallel when you're talking about technology development and business in resource management, just to be like super, ground level about the whole thing. And resource, that's an area where you can talk about both technical resources and also individuals and people and how they, contribute when they're all working in the, when they're all sort of bought into the system and recognizing the balance, prioritizing the effortlessness of it all. That's when systems work best. That's when good things happen. And it's like a well that springs and you don't really know where it's coming from exactly, but it produces good stuff.
So outside then of the technological aspect, what sort of practical lessons have you learned from obviously the book itself, but also your own book? What key parts of that do you think are reflective of not only technology but also ourselves? Because at the end of the day, there is a lot of crossover between many different things: technology, nature, ourselves as individuals, and that's a beautiful thing about these sort of scriptures, if you like, and ideas. What can we as individuals take from this and apply to our own lives?
So I think there's a couple of insights that I've carried with me through my evolution and understanding of the Taoist works and of the Tao Te Ching in particular. So the first one is just at a practical level, being able to take principles that have such a universal fit to them. And so the subtitle of the book is Requirements for a Universal Framework, and framework is a kind of a technically overloaded term that describes a kind of mental models and some tools that you can use for decision making and interpreting the world. And so Taoism, in its notions of Wu Wei and of harmony, are easily translatable to the full spectrum of your life experiences. And what was a kind of revelation to me was that this was a philosophy that didn't require the normal kind of philosophical context switching that happens sometimes when you have a professional life and a personal life. You step into the office and now you're in an environment of corporate values and and leadership principles and whatever the company you're working for happens to sort of deem as the cultural tenets. And then you go home with your family and they're not, and your profit oriented mindset is not necessarily going to be the same. But what Taoism offers is a way to kind of reconcile those and to live a life where the virtues of simplicity, effortless action, and harmony can carry you through 24 hours a day. And so I found that to be really helpful. And I think once I didn't feel like I needed to do that sort of context switching, it liberated me to do better in both my personal and my professional life. It was a form of work-life balance that sounds almost as if you're merging the two, but it's not you're not bolting together a work and a personal life. You're actually living authentically in your whole life. And I think that that's the sort of balance that I just thought was really helpful for me. And then the second takeaway that I got, as this was more from the just the deeper reading of the material and understanding of how to kind of live this way, was that you can take large aspects of our culture, our society, and in this case, I'll just say technology, just as a topic. It is our phones, it is our computer systems, it's our history of tools. It's an entire dimension to our human existence, but that it has and can operate under the same principles and the same framework that is described at the kind of macro universe level that is described in the Tao Te Ching. So you can say, universally, harmony, the sort of internal nature of things, the adaptability and interconnectedness, they work in sort of like this sort of kaleidoscopic way, or there's another term for it, where the sort of macro elements are reflected in each of the components, but in their totality. And so that I thought was pretty insightful for me, and helpful to really see those parts of that human experience through each individually and separately through the lens of the kind of Taoist principles.
Yeah, I think the first point you make there is actually relative to everyone, isn't it? The reason that people hate their jobs is because they're doing a job that they are forcing themselves to do for a wage they don't even enjoy, as opposed to a football player who, like Lionel Messi, for example, it's just so natural for him. He earns more than the average Joe, but he's doing something that is in line with his gifts that he enjoys doing, and he's sort of flowing through the pitch, flowing through life. I think that's a really good way to look at it, as well, for individuals to say, well, what is easy for you? What do you not have to force? Are you a speaker? Can you write and it just sort of comes out of the pen? There's a great poem by Charles Bukowski, talks about, do you want to be a writer? And he says things such as, if you have to sit there and look at the laptop screen or PC screen, you're not, it's not made for you unless it comes pouring out of you and it writes by itself. It's not there for you. Is that what happened to you when you
Yeah.
wrote the book? Was it just an idea that came out of you and you'd got the inspiration? It was just a case of, this is what I have to do and I must do it.
Yeah, the writing of the book, once the sort of commitment arose to do it, the writing of the book was pretty smooth. I didn't run into a lot of hiccups. I think by that point I had already kind of internalized a lot of the thinking, and I'm really drawing a lot on my own, professional experience and themes that I talk about a bunch. So it came out pretty quickly. But one of the things you had said earlier, which I think is worth talking a little bit more about, or at least I'd love to hear what your take is on this idea, but that, yeah, if we can all find careers that are effortless for us, that work, where we are feeling natural and at ease, and those kinds of things, I think that is the ideal for everyone. I wonder if that's not a practical, there's not practical challenges there, right? And many folks are going to find themselves in careers just through, just the nature of opportunity and luck, and where they, the path that life takes them on, going to find them in the jobs at the potential that they don't like. They don't like, for a variety of reasons. They don't have passion for the domain. They don't feel like they're particularly very good at it, or maybe they feel like they're too good and they're underpaid. One of the things that I think that having this philosophy of harmony and effortless action can do, and especially the kind of living authentically and merging your viewpoints, is it allows you to enjoy your job better. And then, not to say there's no goal to have people be satisfied with work that they don't like. That isn't really the message, as much as it is, when you recognize the ways in which you can maintain consistency and harmony in your life by viewing the work that you are going to do through this lens of balance and simplicity, you like your job more. And that was one thing that I found, as my job, the actual nature of my work hasn't changed over the years. I still basically do the same thing that I've done for the past 20 years, and think of technology systems and work for companies that I don't own, for, somebody who's got, motivated by things that don't really relate to me. But over time, as I started to really embrace these kind of ideas, I found that I enjoyed my work more. It reflected, I'm able to see more of myself in the work. I'm able to see at the end that the work is better, and I can feel better about what I'm doing. So yeah, so I'd be curious, what your thought is on, that idea of, it would be great if everybody could find, the job that they want, if we could all be footballers, but
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. There's a phrase, I can't remember the phrase exactly because I'm actually writing a book about phrases at the moment. But it's something like love for your work basically puts perfection in it, essentially. I can't remember exactly who said that, but I think for a lot of people, the idea of a perfect career in inverted commas is are very idealistic. So, well, it's easy for you to say, I have got a mortgage to pay, I've got kids, etc., 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 and I get that. That's why for some people they have a side hustle where they're not making money at the moment, but they are in line with a future project. They might be writing a book, they might be starting a business, they might be drawing for people. That's their talent. So there are quite a few talents that people have generally. It's verbal talents or artistic talents or musical talents and sporting talents, etc., etc. And I think that it's something that you should pursue outside of a job is a vocation or something that you're interested in. That's the first thing I would say. The other thing I would say is over time, our values change. I'm not the same person, and my values aren't the same as I was 15 years ago. 15 years ago, it was pretty much about money was the main value, and actually, I didn't really care. But as you grow and develop as an individual, as we talk about throughout the whole conversation of Wu Wei, you shouldn't have to force your a square peg into a round hole. Now, this is where my alternative view comes in for Wu Wei and going with the flow of life. So there can be flow within a job. So it's a job that you, or I don't want to use the word job for this, but a vocation that you enjoy, and it's no stress. It's lovely. You love it. There's maybe a few parts that you don't enjoy, but you're never going to love everything 100%, whether it's your wife or something else. But there is an alternative to this is saying, okay, well, maybe it's not about finding that job, finding that career. Maybe it's about just going through the waves of life and actually finding where you need to be in 5 or 10 years' time. Like I've heard hundreds of stories because I work as a coach, people who said, I actually fell into this career after trying out X, Y, and Z. They didn't really know what it was that they wanted to do, but they fell into something and they actually ended up loving it, and they didn't know how they got there in the end. But they sort of went through the job openings and moved to different cities and dated people, etc. And they sort of found their way to an endpoint that you could also look at it in respect of going with the flow of life. So I think there's two sides to that argument of Wu Wei for careers, and it's whether you need to be in a job that you get that flow state, as me, G, Semini High, if I can even say the name, states, or whether it's just not being overly focused and forcing your way into something, but going with the flow of life, if that makes sense. So that would be my sort of viewpoint on it. And I think if we're going to say, come back to the career side, I think that the people who are the most successful are people who love what they do, they're good at it, and they have the discipline to be able to continue to put the hours in. They're the people that make it to the top. So whether that comes from you already know from a young age, or whether you have to go through a period of trial and error to find your way there, I think that the going over the crest of or following the waves of life, it basically can apply to both of those sides of the coin, if that makes sense for me, anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And so, those folks that you're describing that took the curvy route to eventually land on a place that made sense for them. You wonder how many of them expected that would be the destination, when they started whatever the path was, the decade earlier or whenever it was. Yeah. And there's a part of it that is in the nature of the contradiction. I think of all of it is, to what extent can you as an individual apply your will to achieve a state of effortless action, right? Like if you're in a job where you feel there's friction and there's stress, that what is the virtuous idealized state is one where there's effortless action and there's balance and harmony. How much effortful action can you or should you apply to transforming that situation into one that then feels effortless?
Yeah, I think I've
Mm.
got a few different points on that, like a few ways to sort of explain it. So Alan Watts says something along the lines of, and there's a story to this where like a Zen Buddhist guru basically said to him, look, I need you to stop desiring. This is how you learn the way. You need to stop desiring. And the guy comes back to him and says, but the more I try not to desire, I realize that I'm desiring not to desire. So it defeats the object. And I think what you're saying as
Yeah.
well is that if you're having to force your way to find this position of no forcing, does that defeat the object of it? It's like you can't think to fix your thinking in some respects. Sometimes you need to stop thinking in order to be living in the present, because thinking can be a detrimental thing. So for me, all of that boils down to determinism versus free will. Are you determined to get somewhere, or you said, as is it down to your will to change things? And I'm very much, I was actually reading this the other day, I'm very much a soft determinist where I believe in determinism, but I also believe in free will. And I think they can coexist. I don't think that there's just one or the other. I think there is an element of both in there. Because otherwise, people who've died of drug overdoses and they've gone to heroin, if you're a full hard determinist, you're basically saying that they were born to do that in some respects, and that was determined for them, which I disagree with. I think that there is subsequent choices we make as individuals every day. Do I pick up the phone to the drug dealer? Do I get money out of the cash machine? And do I continue to do that over and over again? Because there has been stories of people who have gone down that route, but due to their free will, they have decided to change. So I think I know that there's a lot of different points there, but for me that all makes sense in one thought process, because it's forcing versus not forcing. And if you're not forcing, then it has to be deterministic, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's one thing that I like about the Taoist perspective, I think, is that there's an imagery that it evokes of flow, which, if you imagine a deterministic world, is one, you're a boat on a river and you're going to get where you get to, but the waters can be turbulent or they can be smooth, and that there's the degree to which you are kind of surrendering yourself to the river or the flow, and allowing yourself to kind of embrace the ideas of effortless action, the better the ride, the smoother the ride, the happier you are. And so that's the way that I tend to kind of reconcile that, the determinism versus free will piece of it, is that I think at the end of the day, determinism sort of reigns supreme. But I think that, to avoid nihilism and to have an enjoyable life on Earth, it's beneficial to recognize that you can either, tense up into the situation and be uncomfortable, or you can relax into it and appreciate goodness and virtue, and that will somehow have an impact on leading you towards something better. But I don't think that resolves that. There's still a fundamental contradiction in those two ideas, and I think we have to assume that we operate at two different levels, right? There's one that is the deterministic sort of view of things, but that is really impractical on a day to day. That we still have to have a life to lead, and we still have to get up, and we still have to do things. And so we have to act as if we have that choice, which is, again, coming back to the Taoist thing, that it in words that are it's difficult to put into words, but the imagery that the Tao Te Ching evokes is one that to me makes sense of that reconciliation of determinism versus free will. It's the flow. You sort of give yourself to it, and in doing so, you are a participant in its kind of evolution, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I like that you used an example involving water, because water is Taoism, really, because it's
Mhm.
water flows anywhere, it goes to any nook and cranny, it can destroy the biggest sort of body of rock that you've ever seen. And I like to think of, coming back to your point with the river and the determinism versus free will and the smoothness of the ride. I don't know if you've heard of Pascal's wager, where he argues whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, it there's not your life's not going to be any worse by not believing in your life's not going to be any worse by believing in God and behaving badly, but it could be worthwhile your long-term benefit, if that makes sense. Aristotle also talks about a golden mean where either side of maybe sloth and overworking is that middle point. And I think it's the same with what I've been talking about over the last, 10 minutes, definitely, is that middle ground of, yes, you need something to aim for, but maybe you need to go with the flow as well and not be so rigid. I mean, the Eiffel Tower, for example, it sways in the air, doesn't it? It doesn't stay too rigid, because if it's rigid, it snaps. So do we as individuals need to move with whatever's going on, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent? And as you said, try and make the ride as smooth as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the fun thing about talking, in these ways is the notion of resilience and in the same way that the Eiffel Tower kind of sways, and that part of its resilience is its ability to have that flex. If it was too rigid, it would, I think this is a building design, especially here in California, we have a lot of earthquakes. And the best way to make the most sturdy building in an earthquake is to make it super squishy on the bottom so that it kind of rolls with the rolls when the earth shakes. But I mean those metaphors and those descriptors also apply really well to the kind of micro applications of the philosophy. Systems that flex are also resilient, and systems that are adaptable last longer. And so the idea of going with the flow, that notion of being in a flow state, it translates it just across the board. So that's great.
Yeah, definitely. And the flow state from Michati Hemnihai, his name is almost impossible to say. That's even about balance, because it's finding something that's not too difficult and not too easy. It's got to be in that right middle ground, because if something's too hard, you're going to get frustrated and you're going to get upset and you're going to get angry. And if something's too easy, it's just not challenging you enough. So it's all about flow. And I think it's a real great example of that in terms of getting into flow state versus flow in general, being right in that golden mean. So I think we said this off, or we talked about this off air briefly before we came on. Is it 81 chapters or 81 different ways to look at the Tao that you've got in your book? Is that right?
So the Tao Te Ching is 81. You can call them verses. I think they're typically called chapters, but they're collections of words. They've all fit on one page, right? So it's and in the book it is just like, so for example, the first line of the Tao Te Ching being according to your translation, but it's the Tao that you can describe isn't going to be the internal Tao. In the architect way, the first line is the architecture that you can fully document isn't going to be the ultimate architecture. And so there's a lot of references in the book to things like a universal framework and a foundational architecture, with the idea of providing technologists with an easy rubric that they can use to, say, take the Taoist thinking and apply it to their technology development. And I think that the flow, there's the personal flow state that we, or the effortless action, and the kind of harmony that we want to live our lives in on a personal level, which is real. In the book, there's also a call out to the ways in which we want systems to also work in that same way, and how we deliberately apply our decision making in developing those systems, and use the principles in that context. And an example might be in thinking through the kinds of trade-offs that we have to make when it comes to designing systems. Similar to how the building in an earthquake, right? Like there's the contemplation of how can we get our system to be in that state, and that's a lot of what the book is about. The 81 chapters kind of mirror the parables in the original book into decisions that technologists would have to make on a day-to-day basis when they're building their systems.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a few questions there because it's all about asking questions. This is the problem. How can we make this in such a way that's going to eliminate the concern for earthquakes? Because at the end of the day, you can't get rid of earthquakes, but what you can do is try to deal with the repercussions of said issue, let's say.
Mhm.
So I think that's a really good way to think about it. And as you said, asking questions is a really good way to do that. So where can people find your book and where can they get copies of it? How can they reach out to you?
So there's the book's available on Amazon. It is there's a Kindle version and a paperback version. You can actually go to thearchitectway.com and it'll redirect you to the Amazon pages. Um, Paperback book is a better experience because you can just sort of flip through it and land on a page and get inspired. Kindle doesn't give you quite the same experience, but the Kindle one's cheaper. So, but then for me, I'm on LinkedIn, Darryl Kanouse, and you can also connect with me on Twitter or X. My handle is DJK. It's one of those things that I'm hanging on to because I'm actually in my book of things I'm proud of, getting a 3-letter Twitter handle is one of them. And so I know they're very rare, and so I'm sticking with it to the end just because I don't want to give up that. So anyway, so I'm semi-active on Twitter, and you can catch me there.
Fantastic. Is there any final comments you want to make about your book, about the Tao, or just application of anything in general?
Um, I think just at a high level, I would definitely encourage folks to consider, if it's not the Tao, some philosophy that they can embrace, that they can use to cover all parts of their life, and I think so people finally get a lot of value in that. And thank you very much. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate you having me on, and I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, loved it. I could talk about philosophy a lot. It's my mind is I enjoy these conversations, abstract way of thinking, applications of, as you say, for some people that just means I'll flow, but they don't apply it to technological systems or their own life or jobs or anything like that. And it's the application of those sorts of things that really change your perspective on life in general. And I think, yeah, conversations like this with yourself, Daryl, have been fantastic. So thank you very much.
All right, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks again, Daryl. Cheers.